Jeff Lutz, I was just saying in the green room, I don't even need television or the movies or video games or anything else anymore to be entertained. This is far more entertaining. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. As our friend Dan Ives would say, get the popcorn out. There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. I don't even, normally we start with every one of my shows, I usually try to start with the Tesla side of things, but today
Yeah.
this wasn't possible. We have to start with the Fed decision. So overall market reaction, what the Fed said, Tesla stock reaction. I'm just going to turn you loose.
Yeah. The Fed cut 25 basis points. It was a hawk, they call it a hawkish cut, where there was a lot of rhetoric around it in the statement, um, in the press conference. The market sold off. They forecasted, they forecasted instead of, three or four cuts next year, closer to two. I think the market's kind of overreacted these things. It's hard, the Fed doesn't even go one meeting out in terms of, what they think they're going to do. I don't know why the markets overreact to a full year forecast on, a quarter basis point here or there. They're still, they're still restrictive. The federal funds rate is still, well above where inflation is. That is the reason they are cutting. Uh, but I think there's a bifurcation happening in terms of what really drives inflation and what the Fed can actually control with the Fed funds interest rate. So car insurance being up, like they're not going to be able to control that. Um, Shelter, uh, the way that it is calculated, they have, less, they're going to destroy the housing market if they keep rates up. We have the worst housing market, in years. And the way that they measure it in terms of rent is just, it's not reflective of what's really happening. um, so yeah, they're still using kind of this 1950s approach to calculating where the economy is, and it's going to cause problems like this when they need to make these bold moves and need to continue moving or move in one direction. They tend to be late uh, on moves, and this is what we're seeing. The other thing is there's a big difference between the private sector economy and the government economy. There's been a lot of government jobs added. There's been a lot of inflation in government spending, and that is driving a lot of the inflation. And what's happening in the private sector is a much different story. Net jobs are, far lower, and so there's a difference. With that said, we have, projection on GDP, greater than 3%. The jobs market is coming in at the end of the year. The unemployment rate is higher than what the Fed projected. So that would keep downward pressure on rates. So I think the markets reacted to fewer projected cuts. Remember, this was the Fed that I think in, 2022, um, didn't, I think they had, one rate increase, and, the following year there were seven or something. So their ability to forecast out, I think, can be somewhat challenged. With that said, inflation has come way down. It has not come down in the last couple of months, but it's not for things that the Fed can control. Um, in terms of where we think, I have a couple of theories of what I think, could happen. One is they're going to get a lot more rhetoric from the White House in terms of what, the White House believes should be done with interest rates to keep the economy going. Two, if these deregulation schemes start up in earnest and they start quickly and they start moving, deregulation will crush inflation. In fact, we may have a problem on the other side, with deflation, so I think but it's hard for if I were to defend the Fed for 10 seconds, there's no plan out there. There's no commitment. So it'd be hard for them to include that in the forecast.
Which he
But
said, which
that
he
is
said,
certainly something that could happen.
he said there was uncertainty. You have a change of government, there's going to be uncertainty. And he included that in his comments. So yeah, to your point.
Yeah. But I mean, Trump ran on deregulation. He's putting Elon in place. They're going to, they're, they have this outside commission, Doge, to do this work. It's got a prominent place. We see it played a prominent role even today before the government is in place in terms of, the president, uh, the vice president elect putting out their expectations, Elon being very clear. on expectations. So we can't have these things where these things get cramped. So actually, you're seeing in the after, I'm not trying to play this by the minute, but the after hours market is kind of reflecting, okay, maybe there is going to be some control on spending. And so, yeah, I think the Fed is thinking like business as usual. We have to keep using these, and it probably will not be business as usual. So yeah, you have to watch these moves in the market. Sometimes there's a huge, you know, day of reaction, and it changes in the following couple of days. We have a lot of things happening. We have triple witching happening in the markets. I think December 20th, we have end of year, we have, tax loss selling, we have all this different things, all these different mechanical things happening. So it's going to be really hard to predict what happens. I do think that this move was overdone, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
So my first impression was that we've been record after record on the S&P, record after record on the Nasdaq. Yes, the Dow has been down, but it's been down. I think it's 4%, over the last week or so. But basically, all of the equities just way out there. Gold way out there,
Yeah,
silver way out there, Bitcoin way out there. Everything so far out there, and that an excuse like this is an opportunity to take a breath, to blow
yeah,
off some steam, to get the numbers down a little bit. Unfortunately, I was busy during the 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock hour. I couldn't get my leaps back in, and the stock and Tesla's already starting back up again in the after hours, and I don't
yeah,
have Robinhood. I mean, what are you going to do?
yeah, yeah. These things will move. These things will move. I think these things will move quickly. I think there was kind of, I think it was a bit of an overreaction. Remember, what the message from the Fed chairman was, the underlying economy is good in his perspective. Now, I think there's some disagreement, private sector, government, so forth. But in his 1,000 PhDs, they think the economy is the underlying message is, if we're cutting at a lower pace, the economy is actually pretty good, the real economy. So I would just wouldn't over rotate. They can't project if they're going to do three cuts or four cuts or two cuts or five cuts. I think that, to me, those are on the margins. The fact that they're on a cutting regime, unless something like fundamentally shifts, I think is the broader message. I just think the markets kind of, I thought the markets were done kind of over rotating on the Fed. I guess they're not. But I don't see this as the higher order bet is the new administration coming in, deregulation, tax cuts. That is the higher order bet. The corporate tax rate being 15% versus 30% has a much bigger difference on S&P and earnings than a quarter point of rate cuts. So I think people just need to keep their eye on the prize in terms of what's the higher order bit. I'm not giving trading advice. I'm not giving investing advice. I'm just trying to like apply common sense.
Yeah, and the other thing that happened was that the market only went down the Dow only went down a couple of hundred points when the decision came out, and the commentary that went with it. But then it kept going down, and I think it kept going down because what happened to the bonds? The bonds went up even higher, approaching and even exceeding the 10-year, going over 4.5%. So I think the stock market was reacting to the bond market saying, "Oh, inflation's not over. That's what we've been saying anyway," getting their confirmation that that's actually true, and then the stock market going, "Oh my gosh, look what the bonds are doing." And of course, the bond market, the treasuries are part of how people would decide what discount rate to give on a stock when they're projecting earnings into the future. So I think a lot of that is what was taking place, but I agree with you. I think well, we're already seeing the reversal. The Tesla
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
actually up right now in the after hours.
Yeah. And look at the VIX. The VIX went up from, 14 or 15 today to 27.
20.
And so when you usually have that kind of crescendo happening, what you have to think in your head is, okay, is the VIX going to 40 because the Fed's not going to have an additional quarter point rate cut over the next year? Or is this an overreaction to the news?
Right.
That's what you have to do. So if you think that the VIX is going to 40 because the Fed, took a rate cut out, or said they may, slow a bit, but overall they may have one less rate cut or something, or even two on a quarter point. if you think that that should drive the VIX up to go 27 to go higher and higher, it just doesn't pass the common sense test to me. Again, I'm not trying to forecast the market over the next 12 to 24 hours, but it just doesn't pass. There wasn't substantial news to me um, that would the logic doesn't to me when the VIX has this kind of behavior where it has this melt up, it's either done or there's like really really bad news in front of us. And I just didn't hear like really 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 bad news. Like I really really bad news was like they didn't cut today, and in fact they maybe even talk about like not removing all of them next year or something. I mean that would have been
Yeah.
different. I just didn't see this as like, and I also felt to me like I guess Powell had one vote dissent
Right.
on the voting panel, and he also had four non-voting members
I
that
did.
also
Yeah.
dissented. So he's coming out of this committee. He's like, he doesn't want to like, just like, I don't care what any of you say. So he's trying to like, to me,
Ah,
he's trying to represent all these different governors and all their different feelings and have it all pour out on stage. I don't think it works. I think at the end of the day, I applaud him for just like going through with the cut and doing it anyway, but didn't need all the theatrics, quite frankly, and all the, I don't think we need all that. I don't think we need an hour long press conference as well. Um, I think we need a government that, massively deregulates, cuts taxes, reduces spending, and they're going to be on the Fed's going to be on the wrong side of this.
as always, as usual. So I'm going to take out my channel changer now. I'm going to change over to this other program that I've been watching. It's the Musk and Vivek show.
Yeah.
They shook up Congress today with Congress trying to sneak through this massive 1,500-page bill that included a new arena, not arena, a football stadium in DC. I guess it was football. Was it a football stadium? Anyway, uh,
Yeah.
I think so, yes.
Well,
And
you got to read these things too. It's the other thing, Randy. It's like they put the bill out with not enough time to read
yeah,
1,500 pages, unless that's all. But even there's nuance under all these things, but in general, it was a bunch of pork trying to get in under, this thing, a 50% raise for Congress. I understand that they haven't gotten a raise in years, but this isn't the time or place to do it, nor the amount, going from 174, I think they wanted to go to 240. I mean, all of that may have made sense. If you look at what they've screwed up with inflation, they've kind of like almost like barreled us into this, but just not the time and place to do a couple days before the holiday. It kind of comes off and looks sneaky, and they make plenty of revenue from their from lobbyists and from stock trading. So I think their base salary is not as important, but it's just not the right thing. The stadium, I guess, was a transfer in rights from the federal government to DC proper. I don't know what the additional spending was involved. I'd have to read more of the detail. So, I mean, on its face, it looked like a sneaky bill filled with a bunch of pork. They should have trimmed it down, fund the government, make sure the minimum amount of disaster or the right amount of disaster relief gets out to Americans. And maybe that's about it. Um, but it was a bunch of more stuff. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not proclaiming to be an expert in politics, but it does, to your point, like you just say, it does look like we're on a new scheme in America. You can't do this kind of stuff. And all of this spending, I agree with what Elon says. It's all of this spending is a taxation on Americans. Um, just because you think like you were getting for the last 4 years, like we're not going to raise your taxes if you're in the middle class. But if we have a spending regime that raises prices of everything we buy by 20% or more, we've raised your taxes.
yep, that's exactly right. Well, the um, uh, a couple of people put the entire 1,500-page bill on Grok and asked Grok questions
Yeah,
about the bill. That sounds like a great way to
you
do things
can.
going
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
And get
Yeah. You'll be able to do this with LLMs now. It'll be amazing. They've got to make sure, they've got to look for accuracy, and I'm sure they'll even start writing bills to try to trick these things. But yeah, you're going to be able to really get a lot of relevant information, from feeding these things into language models, and you're just going to have, that compute power behind it.
Yeah, and you kind of hinted on this a minute ago. The reality of what Musk is doing right now might actually help the markets recover from today's downturn.
I think the markets are up. I think the markets are up because that bill is getting spiked.
I see.
And I also think the selling was overdone.
Yeah.
It crescendoed and crashed, and if you saw like it spiking back up and recovering in the last few minutes, I'd be like,
Yeah.
there may be more pain to come.
Yeah.
But the fact that there was this crescendo and crash, I think, and then it even spilled into the beginning of after hours, to me tells me like, all right, that leg may have been spent. We'll see. Again, I'm not an hour by hour type,
Right. Right.
but that's what the behavior looked like to me.
Yeah.
Not
Okay.
advice.
Well, okay. Turning to Tesla for a minute.
Tesla,
Tesla had three more price target increases in the $500 range.
they're running. Yeah.
Some of them were double, double their old number. Do you have your own 2025 price target after all of this crazy activity for the last 2 weeks?
Yeah. I don't do that. I don't do price targets, but because all those depend on your time horizon. But if you start considering what could unfold, like where were we, if we're sitting in this chair a year from now and having a conversation, what are we actually going to be talking about? If we're talking about Tesla already having more robotaxis on the road than competitors that have been in, business for years, and they do it in the matter of a couple of months. If we're talking about 1,000, many hundreds or 1,000 or thousands of Optimists doing real tasks in factories, and there's a way to actually do training and get real results, well, then I think things just get nutty pretty quickly. And it's hard to, I think we're in this discontinuity period of, you had a kind of a stable business of building and selling EVs and stationary storage, where you can kind of put a growth trajectory on each one of them. But what Tesla introduced in the last quarter was some stability in those, and growth and gross margin in all three segments: energy, cars, and services. But they introduced new sources of revenue from software. And I think we're in this discontinuity period where that's going to continue to grow. And it's going to be difficult for the traditional analysts to value this business, because how do you value a hardware business? Those are usually single digit, low digit multiples, low double digit multiples. Well, how do you value a software business? Well, those can get into the 40s, 50s, 60s. Well, how do you value a software services and AI type cloud business? Well, okay, now it gets into the hundreds. It's just going to be, there's going to be so many segments. Well, how do you value a business that can license this technology where its own TAM is now greater than the sum of its parts and all these things? Okay, well, then that gets you into real nutty work. So I think we're in this discontinuity period where many of those things could actually be tripped up over the next year. And so it could be volatile. But yeah, I would be leaning towards, a further reflection in the stock price of all of these things. So
Yeah, I think
I'm beyond where we are today. Yeah.
yeah. So my version of it is that Robotaxi is almost quantifiable. So you can kind of look at existing ride-hail services, taxi cabs, and et cetera. You can kind of look at that as a starting point, and you can kind of extrapolate from there and start to guess at what people might do in a world where,
Yes and no.
I say you can kind of extrapolate what people
Yeah.
might do in a world where that taxi ride is 70% or 60% or 50% of what it is now.
But it starts getting nutty, Randy,
It does.
because
It does.
when they ramp, because right now robotaxis today are, like, they're still fairly expensive.
Yeah.
What happens when Tesla's scale is able to cut this to, a fifth or a
Right.
seventh or a
Yes.
tenth of what is
Yes.
being charged today? Things that weren't getting inside of robotaxis before, whether it's people or goods
Mhm.
that may have been transported one way or another, may be now transported by robotaxis. You may see last mile package delivery start going in this direction. We already see food going in this direction with Uber Eats and so forth, but you may see more things happening. So it gets it starts become difficult. It starts becoming difficult to forecast the TAM when the cost structure gets to levels that existing market has never seen before.
And then you add in semi trucks, as Brian Wong says, the impact of semi trucks being autonomously driven is far greater than the impact on the economy of cars being driven by
Yeah,
automation. And
yeah,
but then my third point is that if you can kind of maybe start to extrapolate and get some kind of an idea of what happens with Robotaxi, maybe, but it's hard, as you just pointed out. With Optimus, I just throw up my hands. I mean, I've done all kinds of calculations. I've done them on this program and talked about what it would
yeah.
be at a million or a 10 million or 100 million or whatever. Yeah, but you really don't know. It's I think it's almost the closest thing I've ever seen to being beyond knowing.
Yeah, it's nutty. I think CERN and some others have done a really good job at taking a stab at it, and I'm appreciative of what they do. Uh, but I even throw out some variables for just people to think about. It's already nutty as is, but what happens when the capability of a humanoid starts to align with or potentially be better than the capability of a fixed arm robot or some sort of fixed station of automation that you would have I bought this carousel to rotate cells from the input to the output, and there's a sorting mechanism. But what if I can just put an Optimus in the middle of that conveyor and not need that spinning carousel that was purposely designed for that line, that was purposely designed for that cell, that if I change that line, I change that cell, I may have to throw that thing away. And I'm going to depreciate that thing over, and I can't use that thing anywhere else.
Yes.
But what happens now if you put an Optimus in there that will depreciate faster, that will be more fungible, that could be moved and retrained? The retraining of CapEx that was in a prior world fixed and now becomes fungible, it changes the ledger completely. So I think everybody talks about humanoids and Optimus of taking labor out of an operation and replacing it with a humanoid. What I'm saying is you will be doing that, and you may be encroaching upon existing fixed capital assets that were traditionally fixed CapEx that the humanoid can now do. And on top of that, you're going to have this line changeover fungibility that used to be fixed before, but now it can be fungible with humanoids. And you're going to get greater utilization in your factories, less changeover time. Those things are very difficult to calculate, when you're kind of projecting costs, but they're massive. So I just think it's nutty on top of nutty, but Tesla's got to execute, and we need to see, the finally what I'll say on this topic is I was a little bit of a I was skeptical that the fine motor skills, the speed and the accuracy were going to be difficult things to overcome.
Uh-huh.
Meaning, like, we could get Optimus to a certain level where it can carry a panel,
Uh-huh.
but we can't get Optimus to a level where it's going to be able to screw in a bolt or
Right.
it's going to be able to do some other.
Welding.
And from what I've seen with, catching the tennis ball, the lateral movement across the body, the dexterity in the hand, I'm now of under the impression that they can get the speed, they can get the accuracy, call it dexterity. They can get both of those things to work together. And to me, it just opens up a whole different world of how many stations in the factory can really be automated. This is what I used to do with my team and I, we designed how smartphones were made,
Right.
and both at the system level and then working with our supply base. And one of the things we had to decide upon is what processes should remain manual and what could be automated and what would be the total lifetime return on investment. And
Right.
Optimus just blows all that up.
Right. So I want to take that because I did the same thing, of course, in my factory on a much smaller level. But I can still
Yeah,
remember
of course you did.
we
Yeah,
were trying to buy a capping machine. Okay, a
yeah,
simple capping machine. We had various people come in to try to give us an estimate on what that be. Every one of them, almost exactly $100,000. This is 25 years ago. to build this custom capping machine, as you point out, that would have no other purpose, $100,000 to build the capping machine. Now, if the capping machine had worked, it would have paid for itself. It would have been a good investment, but it would have done about as much work as one Optimus would do.
Yeah. Right. Right. And when you design that out of your next design, that CapEx, you just got to spike that CapEx. And it's exactly. So yeah, it's that's where it gets really hard to even it gets difficult to understand. And we should realize that there's going to be a gradient. It's not like we're going to wake up one day and everything's working. It's going to be a gradient. But man, when that gradient starts hitting, it's just a question of like where does it stop?
I
And
know.
then, what other discontinuities does it create in the economy as a result? So
Yeah.
there's a lot. This is one of when I step back and I think of like what's in front of the US for the next 4 years, I'm so glad that the way the election went, Elon's proximity to the White House, because think about it. We have to figure out autonomy regulation. We have to figure out, we have to figure out the transition to humanoid labor and not like how to have people in the streets ready to like kill everybody that's developed these things. I shouldn't say that. How to get people just how to do a transition of this, an effective transition of this, and then we have to figure out AI. Like those three things
Right.
have to be figured out, and by the end of that 4 year term, we should have superhuman intelligence. We should have robots working in factories, and we should have cars and trucks driving themselves
Yeah.
and making money and doing that. And could you imagine trying to do all of those three things with like the current
Never mind.
approach and the current separation of Elon and his companies and the government? It's
Yeah.
just we're really fortunate that I think this is part of the thing that is helping the stock. It's almost like unburdening the stock because everybody knew that these things were ahead of the company. Like they're going to figure these things out as a private sector company. But the question is like, how do you roll it out and how do you have the right regulatory framework for it to be effective?
So I think I might have asked you this before, but I keep getting a lot of clapback from other people. So I think I want to ask it again. I have restated multiple times on X, on here, on my channel, that I think if they do 2 or 3,000 bots next year, which is, or 1,000 to 3,000 bots next year, that it's not going to be a big deal to go to 100,000 in 2026, and it won't be a big deal to go to 1 million in 2027, that it should be substantially simpler than ramping a car. You are at the other end. You are making smaller devices, cell phones and such. So my bottle business is different. Your cell phone business is different, but it's manufacturing, and it's a matter of building components, buying components, putting the components together, building a line, and going. And when you're talking about a piece of equipment like a robot, in this case, that's a lot less weight, takes up a lot less room, has a lot less moving parts. It just seems to me that the ramp should be faster than the Model X. I mean, sorry, the Model Y was.
Well, it's really a function of decisions that are made, but let's step back. So the CEO of Figure AI has said that he believes the construction of a humanoid is most closely tied to the smartphone tablet type of the world. And I believe if you asked Elon that, I think he would say it's closer to that than it is a car.
Okay.
And then now when you break these things open and you look at them, and one of the things that people in this industry look at is they look at the volumetric density of components because that drives a lot of the complexity in the assembly process. Is there room to do this assembly? How would you do the assembly? How do you do it repeatably, reliably, and do it at speed? So I think humanoids are kind of closer to the framework of a smartphone, which is very volumetrically dense. If you look at your smartphone and you look at this thing, it's about 7 to 8 millimeters thick. It's about 75 or so millimeters wide, and it's about 145 to 165 millimeters long. There are, 1,500 or so components inside of that little
Right.
that little rectangle. So in terms of how it will ramp, it's going to be a function of that, to me, that volumetric density in that chest cavity and the difficulty of in the fine motor actuators. Like to me, like those two things are the variables to look out for. The third thing is, are there any special materials to get the kind of weight um, on the bot? And finally, I would say there's some invisible things that they're going to have to solve for that usually take teams time to do, which, like, for example, the liquid ingress rating. Is this thing going to have a liquid ingress rating where, it can withstand dust and rain? Can it withstand humidity and moisture in various different environments? It'll be the worst thing for these,
Right.
$20,000, $30,000 things, and they kind of, they get exposure to something. Today, if your car, sees rain, it has, it obviously is not breaking. Same thing with your smartphone, but that takes time to engineer and get to those solutions. So I think it's gonna scale. Will it 10x 2 or 3 years in a row? That's a difficult thing to do in a new industry, I would say. But there's no reason why we can't go from thousands to many tens of thousands, in the following year. Um, I think going from the 100,000 to the million, yeah, you're going to start running into the like what's the back end of the process look like? Like what's the bot what's its activation scheme? What's its training scheme? Like how does all that work? And it being fit for purpose for all these things. But once that's figured out, then the scale just opens up big time. So it all comes full circle. I don't think there's any company that I've seen that is building a humanoid now that has the manufacturing and engineering capabilities that Tesla has. And and that is one reason to bet on Tesla. The other reason to bet on Tesla is the brain. It's the both the AI hardware and software,
Right.
which they have now proven with version 13 that they know how to do this. They know how to do it at scale and they know how to do it at cost. That is not an easy thing to do. Everybody else out there is going to go buy, Jetson from NVIDIA. They're going to go work with OpenAI or someone else on the software side of it. They may do their own layer one control software themselves. It's going to be this thing of like procurement of different modules from all over the place. And guess what? When you're doing that, you're paying them a margin. You're not sure if they're all on the same page in terms of priorities to get version one of the product out. So you're going to have a cost issue. You're going to have an execution risk with their approach. And Tesla's in a much better solution to engineer and manufacture and ramp this thing. So I didn't directly answer your question other than I don't know if you're going 10x multiple years in a row. I think that's difficult. It's not impossible. But I do think getting to many hundreds or 1,000 next year doing meaningful work, that's a big portion of this.
Mhm.
And then can they get to many tens of thousands the following year? I think they can.
Yeah.
But they got to lock down. They got to engineer and they got to lock down. They got to let the supply base work. They got to let their factory work.
Okay. And then you mentioned in there about something called, I don't know, version 13 or something. Nobody's been talking about this. But anyway,
Yeah.
I do want to know your experience with version 13.
Yeah. I put a post out and Elon reposted it and
Oh, okay.
I'm not complaining, but it does kill your engagement stats on X. Yeah, I think it's got 16 million views or something.
16 million.
Yeah. I was blown away. And here's what I would say for like the non-believers, because everybody thinks like influencer gets a release, says
Right.
it's the greatest thing ever. You said this on V12.1, you said it on point 3, you said it on point 5. I did not say that, number one. But I have been in positive about it. But here's the thing I've never said. And I've told this and I've been this very consistent through this whole process. When I was driving on V11 last year, a year ago, FSD was doing about 10 to 30% of my drives. I'd use it. It was interesting, had a lot of problems, but it had a lot of promise. But it was only doing about a third of my drives max.
Mhm.
When we got onto the 12 series, specifically when no nag, So I
Yes.
guess that's
Yes.
12.3 or
Such a
12.4 through 12.5, which is what we were on last week. I ramped up to about 70 or 80% of my drives being an FSD. That 12.5.6.4 release was very good, but it was not perfect. It was not Robotaxi ready, but it was doing about 70 or 80%. Now, what I posted, I said, this, I'm ready. Like, I don't need to do human driving anymore with version 13. Why? First off, all the nagging things in 12.5, they've been resolved. You have very smooth speed up. As soon as you come out of a turn, it speeds up right to where you want it, a little bit higher than the speed limit. Before it was janky. It was doing too sharp at turns before, close to curbs. It's not doing that kind of stuff. It's stopping more smoothly. It's doing lane changes more. Now, I've done about 5 or 6 drives on the Model X. I just got it downloaded overnight on the Cybertruck.
Yeah.
So I need to do more drives. I'm sure I may encounter edge cases. So I'm not here to give it the stamp of perfect. I would say my testing is limited, but all of those issues have been resolved. The car drove like I was telling it to drive with my brain. Like this is how much I would have mashed on the accelerator. This is when I would have hit the brake. This is how I would have made the turn. So to me, I'm chalking that up to this photon latency improvement, this 50% or so improvement, where the car is seeing information and it's getting control output, to the steering wheel, to the brakes, to the accelerator. It's doing that in half the time. So it's smoother as a result. It can have these smoothing functions. So I'm blown away. We don't even have all the features that have been listed in the full V13 release yet.
Right. Right.
They're going to increase they're going to increase the model size in the cars. So the think of the brain like you see in the movie Matrix, where he plugs into the back of
Right.
Neo's head and says, "I'm going to teach you how to fly a helicopter." And in a minute, he knows how to fly a helicopter. Well, that software, the size of that release, that's going to get plugged into your car over the air, it's going to increase. So it's going to have more information when the model size increases further, I should say. This is now off of the new supercluster. And so they're going to be doing training jobs even faster now out of Texas. And they're going to you'd be able to do larger model sizes. And then when the B200s come out, they're going to be able to do these training jobs even faster.
Right.
So we're in the middle. The flywheel is turning, and it's pretty exciting. You could definitely see this converging. And now it's one button. It's one button. You get in the car. It's one button. You say where you want to go. You press a button, and the car drives. It parks, and then it can unpark itself and drive on the other way out. So
Yeah. 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 Very, very cool. So the speed, this faster speed. This is one of the things I've been waiting for and put in my list the other day of the things I'm looking for Optimus. So, when you're watching the various robots work, the various humanoids work, their decision making is slow. So their physical actions might be slow also,
yeah,
but that you can see speeding up pretty easily. But it's that decision making, okay, I want to pick up this battery and put it over here, and it's kind of doing the jittery. The most of them like, okay, yeah, okay, now I get it. So would that be the same kind of thing that would be speeding up that you're talking about there?
this photon latency thing, yes, that would, and I can imagine that latency being a lot shorter in a robot, and that's what you'll need for that fluid uh, movement. So yeah, to me, it's been this series of like all the wrong questions being asked versus like what's really happening. Tesla's engineering a robot that is capable and having the dexterity to do the human-like movement, maybe even do it faster. Because what would spike Optimus for me if I used to design factories and how products are made? What would spike it for me in the past? Well, prior to these recent demos, which we really need to see, but would have spiked it for me in the past and been like, this thing is probably not going to make it if they couldn't get the dexterity and they couldn't get the speed. Because if I got to add more Optimus to get the job that one person could get done, I'm going to need more space, and my factories are going to cost more, and it's going to cost me money for to have more of these Optimus. So the fact that they're getting this, it looks like they have a path to human-like speed and dexterity, maybe even faster. It gets nutty. Same thing with the car. The car wouldn't, the movement of the car in V13 wouldn't be where it is if Tesla didn't engineer the solution. So for the people that think that some other company is going to cut and paste this and do it very quickly, I have news for them. I just don't think they understand the space very well. These are also the same people that are, asking, Tesla to release data that other companies are taking in different forms in different ways. These are the same people that are using some random FSD tracker that people are crowdsourcing information. We see people on X now posting fake drives and trying
Mhm.
to, say like, hey, it's running stoplights and doing all these weird things. And, so people have to be really careful about where they're getting their information from and be really thoughtful. But I think this is one of the reasons, I'm not, maybe I'm answering a question you didn't ask, but like, why did most of Wall Street miss this and why are they chasing the price target? Maybe back to your original comment,
No kidding. No,
asking all the wrong questions.
all the wrong questions is right. Well, okay, so I'll end today before we go to the numbers. I'll end on the other news that had to do with those legacy guys, which haven't been able to figure out electric vehicles, much less over the air updates, much less FSD. Honda and Nissan, two of those companies, are talking about putting together a merger. So what did you think?
Yeah, I've seen this in the past. I even posted about these are Japanese. The about 15 years ago, maybe in 15 to 20 years ago, in the mobile phone world, the display vendors, Samsung started ramping up. They started introducing this OLED technology. It was thinner, deeper blacks, good performance. The cost structure wasn't there, but you had all these separate standard LCD companies out there. Toshiba, Panasonic, Hitachi, Sony, all the Japanese companies. And he said, hey, like, we're not going to be able to compete with the Koreans. And then the Chinese look like they're ramping up in the background. Like, we better just get together. So they're still together. It's changed the name. The names have changed multiple times, but as this conglomerate, but they've been under financial duress the whole time, nearing bankruptcy at times. Um, and you can't just, I think the moral to the story is you can't just mash a couple of things together, and get a greater sum on the other side of the equal sign, unless there's real complementary skills in these companies. So I haven't analyzed it close enough of like, does Nissan have this and Honda has this, and together they could even be more powerful. A lot of consulting firms will come in and say, yeah, if you take their procurement buying power and their procurement buying power and you add them together, like you're going to get a reduction in COGS. And it honestly, in reality, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
So you really got to see like what meaningful things that were separate that now together would be more powerful. I just haven't seen it. I'm skeptical of this. But this is what I predict and what I think would happen is
Sure.
these companies can't survive on their own.
Right. Yeah.
So they're going to kind of shuffle the deck chairs on the Titanic. Maybe they get more time. But what does it really terminate to is a question.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Jeff, as always, it's great to have you on. Very good program today. I feel like this is be super useful stuff that you brought us today. And then we'll go on to the numbers next. I tried a new way of transitioning from Jeff to not Jeff, and I may have been more abrupt than I intended. So forgive me that, Jeff. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at where the numbers indeed ended up today. We will start, of course, with Tesla, which ended up down $39.73, but it went up that much on some other days. So it was almost exactly, well, it was not 10%, but on the order of what we call 8.28%. Um, Meanwhile, the Dow was down 1123, the Nasdaq was down 716, S&P down 178, and of course, all of the Magnificent Seven were down very strongly. Now, interesting, Nvidia was only down a buck 48. If you look at the percentages, we have got the percentages at 2.58 negative for the Dow. It's a big drop for one day. And Nasdaq down 3.56 and S&P down 2.95. Tesla was down, as we already said, how much that was. And then the Cathie Woods similarly, except for 𝐂𝐚𝐽𝐽 Corp, which I have no idea why that would be. They were actually up today, but would have been up a lot more if it wasn't for that report from the Fed. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at where things are headed now. So let's start with the bond market. We've got something going wrong here. Let me try again. The bond market. Try the bond market. There we go. Perfect. All right, the 10-year up 1.6 additional points in the pre-market to 4,000. I'm sorry, 4,000. 4.514. Now, I said it couldn't get over 4.5. I was apparently wrong. I think this will be very short-lived, as will a lot of what we've just seen today. I think will be short-lived. Now, will it be back bouncing in the other direction tomorrow for sure? Maybe, maybe not. Will it take a week to get back to normal? Maybe. In general, I would rather see it be a full 10% wipeout before we start back up. I think there's too much exuberance. I think there's too much optimism. I think there's too much Trump enthusiasm. I just don't think it's going to happen as much as it probably would be better for the overall situation. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the oil. Oil is unchanged in both the Texas oil patch and the Brent. Sitting at $70.58. It's been playing around the $70 level all day, up and down, around that number. We've got natural gas up 0.8 in the pre-market at $3.40, back to kind of where it's been. So that is responding back and more or less in the category of where it's been. Okay, the gold, however, continues down. But remember now, this is down $51. It's at 2,602. It was at 2,750 or something. But again, in the course of how you look at these things, it was at the all-time high by a lot. So this is not a very big back off from that all-time high. Now, silver, though, has fallen under 31. That's a little bit surprising. It is down 3.22 in the pre-market. Copper down 1.74%, has not fallen below $4. It's at $4.08. The dollar mixed, but overall, according to the headline, rising against its peers. We have got the Bitcoin down 6,000. Of course, it's going to change every second. 6,078 at 100,563. So back, there's all of these things, these round numbers, they really do matter. You can see it every day. I mean, as you know, I report on this 2 times a day, and you can just start to see how important round numbers are. But anyway, there you are on that one. Now, okay, what about the equity futures? Well, that would be the one that everybody's paying the most attention to. And what you've got is you've got to be able to find them though before I can report them. Here we go. So a little tad, the Dow up 37. Are 0.09%. The S&P up 250, 2.50 are 0.04%. NASDAQ falling, keeps on moving on me here. What's wrong with these apps? Anyway, NASDAQ falling 16.5 or 0.08%. So really not a lot of action here, given the amount of action there was during the day. I've said it before. I'm going to say it again. I do think this is, I shouldn't use the word transitory. I think this is going to be something which is going to blow over and that the optimistic attitude is going to prevail. All right, let's look at Tesla in the after hours is up $3.70 at $443.83. I, as you know, would be perfectly happy. In fact, probably I'm going to buy back my leaps tomorrow no matter what. I think I'll probably, if it's around 440 now, maybe it goes all the way back to 460 by tomorrow morning. Then I don't know. I might have to think about it for a minute, but I'm prepared to buy back. I don't think we're going back to the 400 or the 420 range where I really would like it to in order to buy back in. Okay, so I think I've covered, I haven't talked about a couple of things here real quick. First of all, we've got Phil Beisel coming on in a few minutes, and he's going to be talking about some stuff on the Optimus that you've never heard before. This is brand new stuff. You haven't heard, believe me, you've not thought about this. You haven't been thinking about these ideas, and it just opens the TAM up even more. So come back. That'll be at 7:45. Phil Beisel, he's been on the show before. He used to be an executive at Rivian, a top, C-suite guy at Rivian. one of the first employees, I think employee number, I don't know, under 50, I think. Anyway, Phil will be on. I think you'll really enjoy the show. And then tomorrow morning, regular programming, as far as I know, everything CERN and Bradford Ferguson. And then over the last 2 days, I've been doing this whole series on the Robotaxi, 25 steps that it's going to take to get the Robotaxi done, to get it actually up and running in the real world. And that took 2 days to do that. And so Brian White and I went over those on Monday and Tuesday. I will put both cards up for you to go back and check those out. All right, I think that's all I've got for you right now. Oh, I know, Patreon. It's Christmas. Think about your Randy. Send me a Christmas present. Been great talking to you.